Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the 7th Annual National Call of Unity, Healing the Heart of the Movement. I'm Arlene Vassell, Vice President of Programs, Prevention, and Social Change with the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. I am humbled and honored to share this space and time with you all as we step away from our busy schedules to remember and mourn the lives lost to domestic violence, sexual assault, and other forms of gender-based violence, and celebrate those that have survived these senseless acts of inhumanity. We also come together today to honor the courage and legacy of advocates who toiled before us and connect with each other to remain strong, inspired, and motivated to move our social justice efforts forward. Thank you all for the tremendous work that you do every day to support survivors and their loved ones. And thank you for being with us as we kick off National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. National Domestic Violence Awareness Month evolved from the Day of Unity held in October 1981 and conceived by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. To honor the tradition of the National Day of Unity, the National Domestic Violence Awareness Project Advisory Group began organizing the National Call of Unity in 2010. On this call, you will hear from an amazing and diverse group of individuals, including survivors, advocates, community leaders, national organizations, government officials, and advocates that share the same goal of strengthening and transforming efforts to end domestic violence and other forms of gender-based violence. Together we can, together we will, no more excuses. Now, with great pleasure, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Rafael Lopez, Commissioner for the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families.
Thank you, Arlene. We're so grateful to you, the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, and all of the amazing partners who are joining us today from across the country. It is such an honor to stand in solidarity with such an amazing group of people for the second year in a row. And as a survivor myself of domestic violence, an ally and a leader committed to brighter futures for all of our nation's vulnerable children and families, we want to start by thanking each of you for your tireless efforts and sacrifices and advocacy. Oftentimes, it is your support, your partnership, and your willingness to stand up and be leaders on behalf of our families and in partnership with their families that gives them hope and helps believe in them that they are extraordinarily powerful and capable beings of crafting a new life that is free of violence and one that is defined on their terms. As the Commissioner of the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families, we are responsible for helping lead two bureaus. The first, the Children's Bureau, responsible for foster care and child protective services, and the second bureau, with which we're probably more familiar, is the Family Youth Services Bureau, responsible for programs like adolescent pregnancy prevention, family violence prevention and services, as well as runaway and homeless youth programs. And what is more important now more than ever is the way in which these programs connect with one another as we work together to craft a different kind of narrative as we serve many of the same families in these multiple systems. We want to both honor what you've done and also infuse all of our work and our systems advocacy with a new and important urgent call to action. That urgency is driven by the need for expanding what we think about in terms of our prevention programs, growing in tandem with the increased demand for intervention services that so many of you have been advocating for decades. We can no longer afford to be a system or a service network that is only triggered when we discover a child or a family in crisis. We have to ask ourselves, what might our systems look like if we more deeply spend our time, our energy, and our financial resources to invest in the families earlier on when the challenges begin to rear their heads? Human services and social service agencies across this country are serving so many of the same families. We have to do a much better job collectively of making sure that we are doing what we can by honoring and respecting privacy, but also integrating our services in a much deeper way, especially around the co-occurrence of challenges and struggles that so many of our families experience, specifically making sure that we connect our community-based work, our homeless programs, our schools, our healthcare clinics, our DV work, Because families, as you all know, have multiple needs, and they don't live in systems or silos or divisions. They live in their homes, in their neighborhoods, in their communities, and they want to make sure they're getting the help they need when they need it. And being able to navigate, as so many of you know, the multiple caseworkers and service providers that don't always have coordinated plans, whether it's an emergency crisis or in the context of navigating systems. Your advocacy and your partnerships over the last 30 years has established and strengthened safety nets for families all across the country, and we are deeply grateful for this. You've also been leading the charge to focus on primary prevention and making sure that we are honoring all members of the family and figuring out how we can do a better job of providing services. And you all know that moving away from a crisis-driven system means increasing our investment in prevention programs for families and children first. And when we think about it in that context, when we're placing the family as the nucleus of our work, we know that we can do this because we don't want to see multi-generational survivorhood of violence, trauma, and abuse. Putting families first is also about advancing caseworker responses, shifting our practices, and integrating an advanced understanding of domestic violence across all of our systems, charged with providing support once, unfortunately, a spiral of crisis has begun. And we only need to look at the data from multiple systems that I've listed up right now to better understand what's happening. For example, we know that 429,000 children in foster care, as recently reported by ACYF's 2015 Adoption and Foster Care Analysis Reporting System, has some connection to the domestic violence world. The rate of infants under 1 entering foster care was 11.4 per 1,000 in the general population, and this is more than twice as high as for 1-year-olds and more than 3 times higher than rates for older children. And between 2013 and 2015, children entering care due to neglect increased from 58 to 61%, and parental substance use disorders increased from 20 to 32%. And specifically, when we think about domestic violence, that while 30 to 60% of families who are involved with the child welfare system experience domestic violence, roughly 15% of caseworkers actually identify the domestic violence in those families. As you all know who do this work in the community, families often struggle with multiple co-occurring factors. It may not be just one issue. It might be domestic violence and mental health services and substance use disorders, or any one of them. And yes, we can do so much more by listening to and paying attention to the data and the research to spur the system innovation that I know so many of you are working hard on. We want to change the functions of these systems to better support families, not just when they're in the heart of the crisis, but well before the crisis occurs. And these system access points are so critical, whether it's family income or supportive housing or permanent housing and healthy relationship programs, high-quality child care, home visitation, trauma-informed educational systems. You know the gamut of how all of these work together, including systems of support networks for youth aging out of foster care and those even experiencing intimate partner violence and other kinds of violence in their lives. We see domestic violence advocates as critical leaders and partners for completely flipping the script on how we support our families on the front end, not just when the crisis happens. And we at the Administration on Children, Youth, and Families are expanding this year's Call of Unity theme, which is action plus awareness equals social change, by asking all of you to connect even more deeply with your child welfare, your substance use, and your behavioral health, and your early childhood, and your homeless service systems, and your colleagues. You know these individuals from your community. And we know it's tough. We know this is not easy to do, but connecting these dots across our own systems is so important for advancing our work on behalf of families. We know that IPV Prevention Council's efforts to advance a comprehensive national prevention agenda and broad support for its full implementation at the national, state, territory, and local levels is so important. And our call of action to all of you is to invite foster parents and biological parents and adoptive parents and children and youth in foster care and former foster youth and all the various people who are touched by this system by helping them craft a different narrative of this work. We want to make sure that they understand that they are allies in this movement and they are part of, again, placing families first in this work. We invite families and youth to chart with us respectfully as we work on this movement to help us chart a direction where we can all follow. That means a call for help, including resources that families need even before they're harmed. We know we can do this because this has always been a highlight of the movement, a movement that's always about being on the precipice of change and being thoughtful with the resources we have. And on that note, we are so thrilled to announce that for the first time that the Family Violence Prevention Service Act has been in existence, that there's a children's set-aside that was enacted in 2010, we are able to announce the awarding of $5 million in grants specifically for specialized services for abused parents and children. Similarly, we are thrilled to announce that in partnership with the Children's Bureau, we will soon be announcing the recipient of a 5-year grant to launch a first-ever Quality Improvement Center for child welfare-involved families experiencing domestic violence. This center will build the capacity of several local collaborations across the country to test out new ideas about the intersectionality of working closely with the child welfare agencies and domestic violence programs to evaluate what works and to try to implement and sustain those comprehensive changes across the country. Additionally, leaning into the use of social media in our country, we want to make sure that we lift up and announce that on October 15th, we will have a DVAM YouTube challenge, and the challenge is the first of its kind for the Administration on Children and Families as an agency, and the challenge will be open to individuals and organizations that support children and youth exposed to domestic violence and their abused parents. The goal being to bring attention through social media outlets to the most innovative and inclusive approaches and strategies to improve safety and promote healing for children exposed to violence. We know we can do so much more using social media. And we know that while so many of you worked for decades on this issue, and we've made significant progress as a country, that there's still a long journey ahead on reaching the goal of ending domestic violence. And I'm reminded of the words of the poet and artist Mayra del Valle, who wrote, quote, "A movement is not a flash of light. It is a flame, a torch passed from one generation to the next, and every so often we are blessed with the possibility of transformation, to transform, to blaze again, and we're forced to race down the path of progress. We are grateful for all of your energy, your advocacy, your championship, and your sacrifices to help carry this torch and to continue the movement into this new generation. It is leaders like you who are catalysts for crafting a very different future for all of our children, youth, and families in America. Thank you for your service to the country. Thank you for all you do. And I'd like to now turn it over and introduce Crystalyn Berry, who is the Senior Office and Safety Net Coordinator at the National Network to End Domestic Violence.
Thank you. I am so honored to participate in the Call of Unity this year on behalf of the National Network to End Domestic Violence. Healing the heart of the movement is no small feat. It must be intentional and steadfast. I believe we can achieve it by being change agents within our own communities, within our organizations, and finally, within ourselves. Seeking change will look different for each community, but I think that it starts with continuous engagement across intersections. In order to continue this work, we cannot be limited to working with organizations that are doing the same work. Instead, we should incorporate elements of transformative movement building, a concept that is grounded in love and purpose and is also about intentionality. We can no longer seek to work only with those who are like-minded. We must, as Norma Wong has stated, seek to build with those who are like-hearted as well. Difficult conversations are a must in our organizations. We should ask ourselves, are we perpetuating the power and control dynamic in our own agencies? In anti-violence work, we strive to end those destructive behaviors, but is that same pattern being subliminally carried out organizationally? Are we practicing what we preach? These questions are difficult, but must be resolved before continuing this work. In our organizations, we must also ensure that we center those often found at the margins. Decisions must be informed by input from marginalized groups about what they actually want and need. We must ensure that our brothers and sisters that have come before us actively lift and mentor the younger generation. Last, but certainly not least, we need to take the time to heal ourselves. We must be good to ourselves because, in essence, we are the heart of the movement. Individually, we are carrying the torch every day when our feet touch the ground when we get out of bed every morning to do this work. Healing our hearts will help heal others that have experienced trauma. I am hopeful, excited, and prayerful that through our own personal development and strength and working together, we are a movement in transition that will eventually end domestic violence. In closing, I want to take a moment to thank the advocates that work with survivors day in and day out. Because of your dedication, resolve, and kindness, survivors are able to pick up the many pieces that have been broken by systemic racism, oppression, sexism, classism, and other intersecting factors. You know that each survivor is different and there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Because of your tireless efforts, our world is a better place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chrislyn, and thank you for all that you do. Now let's welcome Ken Noyes, who's an awesome colleague from the National Domestic Violence Hotline. He's the Chief Operating Officer there.
Thanks very much, Arlene. It's an honor to be here with all of you today on behalf of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. I've spent the last 2 decades or so working in the domestic violence field, and I'm in awe every day of the brave survivors and families whose stories I've listened to over the years. It's really amazing that they are able to overcome so much. Their courage in the face of enormous and sometimes life-threatening obstacles is always an inspiration to me, and they are the reason I continue to do this work. I also deeply respect every single person who works to support and empower survivors of domestic violence. Everyone who answers crisis calls, runs shelters, improves policy and systems responses, provides legal representation or therapeutic counseling, or offers a safe space. All of you contribute to this movement to end violence in ways that are beyond measure. Ending domestic violence takes all of us because it affects all of us. When there is violence in our communities, it is a threat to our safety and to our very connections as human beings. But I know and have seen that we are so much stronger than this violence. We are stronger because we care and we are committed to healing ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities. Healing from trauma and abuse is a journey that is different for every person, but we start with the self. Self-care is a major focus at the hotline because the advocates here experience from moment to moment survivors' challenges, grief, and confusion. Not only is self-care important for the people who reach out to us, but we emphasize it for every staff member through our ongoing wellness program. Secondary trauma can affect us in the work we do, and in order to care for others, we must first care for ourselves. Accepting that we are worthy of care and respect from ourselves and from others can be such a turning point in all of our lives. Healing also takes place through appreciative, respectful, and supportive collaboration. No one does this work alone, which is why the relationships we build across organizations and as individuals are really essential keys to our success. In this field, we all bump against difficult hurdles like limited resources and persistent societal misconceptions about domestic violence and its deeply rooted intersectionality with multiple forms of oppression. I believe we must continue to find ways to come together at local, state, and national levels to lift up our collective work in addressing these global challenges. Healing within this movement most often happens when we are working together to care for survivors, our communities, and for ourselves and each other. Thank you all for the privilege of being a part of this year's National Call of Unity. Our next speaker is Susan Sullivan, Prevention Campaign Specialist at the National Sexual Violence Resource Center.
Thank you, Kenneth. On behalf of the National Sexual Violence Resource Center and our partners in the field, we are so thankful to participate in another call this year. As your partners in sexual violence prevention and response to survivors of sexual assault, it's a privilege to join in unity with this group in coming together to create change. First off, thank you for the work you're doing to create safer communities and a future free from all violence. We're in all of your efforts and the lives they impact. This year's theme, Healing the Heart of the Movement, acknowledges the struggle of individuals affected by domestic violence while sharing a message of hope. That hope may seem difficult to find, but as Rumi said, the wound is the place where light enters you. In the context of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I see this light as a strength needed for survivors and advocates to keep persevering, the strength that shows we are brave enough to keep striving for change, vulnerable enough to feel the weight of what we're up against, but strong enough to bear it. This strength is best demonstrated in the ways that I see survivors reaching out on a day-to-day basis. As one of the administrators on NSVRC's Facebook page, I frequently receive messages from survivors of sexual assault. And in spite of the varied backgrounds and ages of these survivors, they all ask in some way and in some form the same question: how can I help other survivors? And to me, this knowledge is an incredible source of strength. Not just that someone can pick themselves back up, but that they want nothing more than to reach their hand down to pick someone else up, someone who's going through what they went through. Because healing your heart sometimes means healing someone else's. So this October, NSBRC will help amplify the message of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Together, we can bring hope, help, and healing to those who need it. Because the work we all are doing is truly one and the same. We're working towards a shared vision that prevention is possible. Finally, I want to invite all of you to join us this April for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. The theme is engaging new voices and calls upon less traditional partners such as coaches, fathers, faith leaders, and Greek life members to get involved in sexual violence prevention. The intention is to bring new voices into the fold to help heal the culture that tolerates violence. Thank you. Up next, I want to introduce Michaela Rios, Project Coordinator from the National Latino Network / Casa de Esperanza.
Thank you, Susan. Today I'm humbly honored to represent Casa de Esperanza and its national project, the National Latino Network for Healthy Families and Communities. As we commemorate the beginning of National Domestic Violence Awareness Month with the National Call of Unity, I place my hand over my heart and I greet you all with an ancient Mayan greeting. In Lakech Alakim, tú eres mi otro yo, you are my other me. This ancient Mayan greeting has evolved into a moral code. It has become a way of living, a way of being. It teaches us that when we greet with an open heart, we acknowledge that our collective humanity is part of the same universal vibration. And when we greet others, we greet another part of ourselves. And when we do harm to others, we do harm to another part of ourselves. At Casa de Esperanza, we value collective knowledge, foster inclusivity, and promote social change through culturally specific approaches for community and by community, similarly to the oneness approach taught by the Mayan people. And as we begin to heal the heart of the movement, may we establish and build relationships based on mutuality and respect. May we seek a deep understanding of all communities and centralize this cultural understanding in the movement. May we understand the origins of the historical, collective, and intergenerational trauma and uplift the resiliency, wisdom, and strength of survivors. May we keep the realities of survivors and their children central to the movement. And finally, may we recognize that our organizations independently will not end violence, and that we believe in the power of collective wisdom of communities. We are at a time and space in human history where we can no longer live individual lives. A time and space where we can convert hurt and pain into love and compassion. A time and space where we can recognize that our full humanity is interdependent and interconnected with one another and with the earth. A time and space to connect and invoke our ancestral teachings, principles, and values. To that, I end with the Mayan greeting, In Lakech Alakim, tú eres mi otro yo, you are my other me. Somos uno, we are one. Next, I would like to introduce Ann Turner, Elder and Victim Advocacy Coordinator for the National Clearinghouse on Abuse in Later Life.
Hi, everybody. I'm honored to represent NCAL today, and I would like to thank Yvonne and the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence and all the speakers on today's call for the incredible work and dedication you all do to improving the lives of survivors. I also want to honor all of you that are doing the hard work, the day-to-day work in your communities to improve the lives of survivors. Here at NCAL, we advocate for safety, respect, and autonomy for survivors of abuse in later life. As you all know, the aging population is growing at a very rapid rate. 10,000 people a day are turning 65 in the United States. So if you're not seeing older survivors in your service programs, you will be. Through advocacy and education, NCAL works every day to improve victim safety and improve offender accountability and to expand community collaboration to work on this important issue of abuse in later life. We also are proud to provide technical assistance for the Abuse in Later Life program with the Office on Violence Against Women. During this October, NCAL is using the theme, bringing older survivors in from the margins. Research has shown that older survivors of abuse are often unaware that domestic violence and sexual assault services are available to them, or they feel that the available services are not geared towards their unique needs. It is our goal this month to shine a light on older survivors and to provide advocates with tools they can use to ensure that their services are effective and accessible to survivors all across the lifespan. We also want to acknowledge that we cannot support survivors if we ourselves do not feel supported. We as advocates must ensure that we take care of ourselves in order to engage in this work. We would not be in this field if we did not honor our common humanity and recognize ourselves in the faces and voices of all survivors. Accordingly, just as we care for and support and nurture survivors of violence, we must be mindful of our own needs and own experiences and find ways to support and nurture ourselves as we do this very important work in our communities. In NCAL, we know that we cannot help survivors to heal without providing advocates with support and practical tools. To that end, we have created a resource to help advocates evaluate existing programs and policies to ensure that they meet the needs of older survivors. I invite you to download our recently released toolkit called Working with Older Survivors of Abuse, a framework for advocates. The toolkit includes written material, video, and supplemental resources to provide guiding principles, as well as some minimum guidelines and practice strategies for advocates to consider in their work with older survivors. The toolkit is completely free and available to you for your work. Additionally, we have created some downloadable posters for the month of October that represents older survivors and provides a space for your community to include your local information for people who want to reach out for help. So please visit our webpage, like us on Facebook, and join us on Twitter throughout the month to learn more. Again, I just want to thank you all for the incredible leadership and work you are all doing to make a difference in the lives of survivors of violence in your community. Your work and leadership is imperative for us to keep this work moving forward. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. It is Rachel Haas, who is Associate Director with No More.
Thanks, Anne, and I'm honored to be on this call, to be with all of you. And on behalf of No More, I just want to thank you for making a real differences in the lives of survivors. You provide so much support, resources, and most importantly, hope in the most difficult and darkest and most hopeless times. And I just want to thank you for standing with survivors and working to transform our communities with such enthusiasm, resilience, and empathy. We really cannot thank you and everyone enough for the work that you do. And I'm honored to participate on this call on behalf of No More. No More was created with the core belief that together we can end domestic violence and sexual assault. We know that we can create a world without gender-based violence, but only if we work together collaboratively to address all forms of violence. We cannot end one form of oppression without working and standing to end all forms of oppression. No More offers open source multimedia campaigns and digital tools with the goal of helping to challenge and transform the cultural and social norms that perpetuate these problems. We invite you to download and use and co-brand No More's free tools during Domestic Violence Awareness Month and year-round to shine a light on these issues and drive additional resources for your work. We are honored to work alongside you, and together we can and we will end domestic violence, sexual assault, and abuse. Next, I would like to introduce Connie Burke, Executive Director from the Northwest Network of Bisexual, Trans, Lesbian, and Gay Survivors of Abuse.
Thank you. Lashana Tova, Happy New Year. There is so much to be thankful for as we enter 5777 on the Hebrew calendar. That's fiscal year 2017 to everyone else. As of last Friday, and for the first time ever, our country has a national LGBTQ IPV Institute. This institute, funded through VIPSA and joining institutes representing other communities in the National Domestic Violence Resource Network, is charged with advancing practice, policy, and research that centers trans and gay survivors' lives and builds solutions that work for our communities. This marks a watershed moment for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and gender nonconforming people, and for all the advocates who have been working for decades to increase self-determination and safety for LGBTQ survivors, including many leaders that are on this call right now, and so I just say so much thanks to you. Still, last year was a challenging one for us. Across the country, nearly 200 pieces of transphobic and homophobic bills, citizen initiatives, and administrative policies were introduced. Many were fought back by coalitions between LGBTQ people and anti-violence advocates, like here in Washington State, where citizens refused to send forward an initiative that would harm trans and gender nonconforming people. In North Carolina, on the other hand, our communities have been thrown into crisis when a so-called bathroom backlash bill passed in a last-minute maneuver by the state legislature. But this time, instead of anti-trans and gay initiatives being a reliable wedge to drive communities apart, you all and people from all walks of life stood with us and said, enough. We don't need divisive, hurtful policies that stigmatize and target trans and gay people, that harm our friends and family, our kids, and our coworkers. And our movement's landmark VAWA, Violence Against Women Act legislation, was utilized by the Department of Justice to call out the North Carolina bill on gender and sex discrimination. In her historic address, Attorney General Loretta Lynch said, directing her remarks specifically to transgender people, "We see you, we stand with you, and we will do everything in our power to protect you going forward." Those are sentiments that every survivor needs to hear from leaders in their community. And with the Institute, the Northwest Network building power with NCAVP and its member programs and community leaders and advocates from across the country, we echo this pledge. We see you, we stand with you, and we will do everything we can to ensure protections against violence by intimate partners, by the state, by institutions, by anyone going forward. Thank you so much. Next, we will hear from Gretchen Shaw, Associate Director for the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Gretchen?
Thank you so much, Connie. It sounds like you're doing fantastic work, along with all the other incredible speakers on today's call. Thank you so much, Yvonne and the NRC, for making today's call possible. It's truly an honor to be with you today on behalf of NCADV and speaking personally, and after 18 years in this movement, I continue to be humbled by the strength and determination of victims and survivors of domestic violence and all those like you who are working to assist them. I feel like I learn something new each and every day, and I'm truly grateful to be part of this collective journey to healing. Thank you for allowing me to work with you and learn from you in our path to empowerment for all victims and survivors of violence. We at NCADV are committed to ensuring that the voices and needs of victims and survivors of violence are at the core of all we do and the center of all of our efforts. All of those are geared towards educating about the dynamics of domestic violence and engaging individuals and communities in ways that demand zero tolerance for domestic violence. This October, NCADV's efforts include the launch of our second annual Take a Stand virtual campaign and toolkit, which has been utilized and employed by over 2,000 people since September 28th of this year. collaborating with communities such as the City of New York in their new campaign called #NotAFan, which is a fan-focused public awareness campaign that empowers fans to take a stand against domestic violence, featuring teams from New York such as the Yankees, Mets, and many others. We're also offering a space for connection, education, and healing at our national conference on domestic violence happening October 23rd through 26th in Chandler, Arizona, and several people on today's call will actually be presenting at that conference. Our hope is that at this conference, people will be able to hear directly from victims and survivors of domestic violence about what works best for them, how they can best be supported and assisted, and how we can learn from them. So here we hope their voices are amplified, and we hope all attendees are able to walk away with a better understanding of how to do our best work. So again, we're honored to be part of today's call. Thank you so much for your work, and we hope you will stand with us as we demand zero tolerance for domestic violence.
Thank you, Gretchen, and thank you for all that you do as well. Now let's welcome our survivor speaker, Ms. Ramona Brant. Ramona spent the last 21 years of her life behind bars on a first-time nonviolent drug conspiracy charge. She was granted clemency by President Obama on December 18, 2015, and was released on February 2, 2016. Ramona is a tireless advocate for women in prison and is currently traveling the nation to shine a spotlight on domestic violence and the devastating implications for survivors. Ramona comes to us from a place of strength and courage to share her story in the hopes that others may not endure the same abuse. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ramona.
Thank you. I'm honored to be a part of this Call of Unity this year. This is really a blessing, twofold blessing for me. Number one, last year today, I was incarcerated serving a life sentence and had already done 21 years. I was granted clemency on December 18th, which freed me from that life sentence. One of the main reasons why I was incarcerated was because my children's father was very abusive, and he found himself in a situation knowing that he was going to go away for a long time, and he decided that he didn't want me out here without him, so he refused to take a plea agreement and ended up, I went to trial and lost. But when I moved to Charlotte in '88, I never imagined how my life would unravel, and at the rate that it did, initially he was a very compassionate, loving person. And during my first pregnancy, he became abusive. I left, not knowing if there was any resources in Charlotte. I returned back to New York, where I found comfort with my family. He continued to persist that he wanted to have this family, and I came back to Charlotte. For a while, everything was really nice. Everything went well. During my second pregnancy, not only did the abuse return, but with a vengeance. And it just almost destroyed me mentally, emotionally, physically. I had never imagined being pistol whipped or beaten as severely as I was. And I believe the only way that I was able to make it through all of that situation is that I would often cry out to God to help me, to save me, protect me, to keep me. For some people, they might think that he wasn't there, but I know he was there because it could have been worse. And if it had not been for God, I can't begin to imagine how this whole situation would have turned out. In spite of doing 21 years, in spite of getting my hand broke, my head busted open, in spite of it all, I'm alive today, and it is by the grace of God. And I just want to thank each and every organization that has stood up and taken a stand against domestic violence and now raising their voices so that we are heard. We have a voice now, and we can speak out against what has happened to us, and prayerfully we can help prevent that from happening to another person, whether it's a child or another female or even a male. my children, they viewed a lot of the times that their father was attacking me. And back then when I first went into prison, they had a program here called the Hero Program, and that actually helped my sons deal with what they were going through. So I'm grateful that people, organizations, compassionate people are coming together and doing something to help heal those that are broken. And I just ask that you also consider the ones that are incarcerated. A lot of the women that I did time with, they are there because of some type of relationship with a man. And if it wasn't for their father abusing them or their husband abusing them, this is where a lot of women end up, either the grave or the prison. And we need more programs going into the prison to help them out, to help them heal, to know that someone on this side of the wall cares about them and is willing to support them as well. Again, I am so honored and thankful for this opportunity to speak with you all, to be free, to be alive. Thank you so much for everything. God bless you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for sharing your story and for your words of wisdom. And just know that we do stand with you and we stand for you. Now we'll have Reverend Daniel, who will lead us in a universal prayer and moment of silence. Reverend Daniel is an ordained minister, an attorney, and a program manager with the Faith Trust Institute. Reverend Daniel is also a member of the third cohort of movement makers with the Move to End Violence.
Will you pray with me? With our hearts and minds set on the liberation and healing of every survivor of domestic and sexual violence, let us pause today to remember, to name, and hold in our hearts those who have not survived the violence inflicted upon them. We remember every woman and child who feels trapped, ashamed, helpless, and unable to reveal or leave their abusive and violent circumstances. Encourage, strengthen, deliver, and sustain them, and give them hope. Let us remember every woman and child that is hiding, fleeing, or escaping abuse and violence, or who has had the courage to tell her story. Strengthen, comfort, and sustain them, and give them peace. For every woman and child who is sitting in prison, who defended herself from sexual and domestic violence, strengthen, reassure, and sustain her, and deliver unto her justice. We remember every woman and child whose wounds of sexual and domestic violence we cannot see and that time has not healed. Heal and free her from the bondage of violence. Holy Spirit, thank you for the elders in our movement who have shared freely their wisdom, their vision, and their hope. We celebrate the progress we have made. We acknowledge the work yet to be done and embrace and welcome young leadership and the prospect of a brighter future for all. We give thanks for the community of diverse allies and the opportunity to work collaboratively and to unite our voices and energy to free women and children from violence. Holy Spirit of all that is sacred, you have invited us to be your hands, your feet, your voice, and the embodiment of your love in this world. We are to be change makers and movement makers for the liberation of every woman and child whose life has been touched by domestic and sexual violence. Give us courage. Give us courage to demand justice, compassion to bring about healing and wholeness, and a thirst for peace that brings new life for survivors of violence. Be with us in the years ahead. Be with us as we face new challenges. Amen.
Amen. Now let's welcome Rebecca Balog. She's the Grant Compliance Manager from the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center.
Bilamaye na ambeta washde. Thank you, it's a good day. Thank you all for speaking today. And most of all, thank you to our survivor story sharing today. Your voice inspires our work, and we're grateful to hear you today. And you're the reason we won't stop. You're the reason we're going to continue to dedicate our lives to making change and bringing up also the next generation of youth in leadership to continue ending domestic violence. So Wopila and Pila Maye. So my name is Rebecca Balog from the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. We also hold the National Native Love Youth Project, and I also work at the Women of Color Network. It's a privilege for us to be with you all today and collectively as culturally specific organizations. We celebrate DVAN as a unified front across our cultures to end violence. At the NIWRC, we offer, we're the National Indian Women's Resource Center. We offer resources and toolkits on domestic violence and intersections including youth and teen dating, sex trafficking, engaging men, advocacy, public policy, technology, stalking, murdered and missing, and various other TA and training opportunities. And for the closing for this call, I just want to remind us to act in an intentional way that will resonate deeply in our hearts and in our minds as we continue to fuel each other for this next year in this work. We share this goal to end violence in the homes of our community members. We have the stories left for us by our ancestors that ending violence against women is not just good for women, it's good for the entire family, for the future generations and our children, our neighbors' children, and communities as a whole, for all of our cultures and our overall nations and globally as a race. Ending violence against all people is good for all people, and the work we do today is good for all of our future families tomorrow. From the stories within our communities, we hear words about our grandmothers of this movement. We hear the words described as standing on the shoulders of giants. We hear them from our traditional and spiritual or faith leaders, the complex issues with long and difficult stories of sacrifice along the way to get to where we are today. Domestic crimes are crimes that are often passed down through generations within our families, and the cycle includes the next generation. So we're doing this for our kids, for those grandmothers whose shoulders of the giants we stand on continue to chip away at that silence that bound us for too long out of fear, solitude, and oppression. Those hurdles are still the barriers that we're breaking down walls to reach the most needy in our communities. Let's remember that together we're accountable also to each other in this movement. As advocates, we have to exemplify wellness to each other so that we have more strength and more wellness in our quest to end violence in the communities that we love. I want to close with a more traditional moment, reflecting on the various connections across our diverse culturally relevant activities. In ending violence, we're protectors of the seeds, the sun, the water, and the air. So let us grow strong generations within our communities, in unison for the most natural ways from the words of one of our movement grandmothers, Tilly Black Bear. Let's treat each other as relatives. Once we obtain that, we can finally end the violence in our communities. Thank you all for your life work in ending violence. Let our future be led by strong generations to come, and let's keep it real. Let's keep our movement wellness-oriented. Take care of yourself so you can take care of each other. Mitakiase, which is Lakota for all of my relations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Now let's welcome one of our youth leaders in our movement. She's a member of the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault Youth Advisory Council, Zion DeFawn. Zion, are you there?
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity. As a part of the Young Advocates Institute, I can definitely say that our institute has worked effortlessly to try to gain young adults to potentially become young advocates and later advocates like yourselves. In order to end all domestic violence, the Young Advocates Institute feels that it is imperative to educate teens ages 13 through 17 on what sexual assault and abuse, whether that be physical, mental, or emotional, actually looks like. And if they were to witness it firsthand, they become sensitized to it so that they know how to address it properly. For the work that has to be done and for it all to be done, the Young Advocates Institute has mastered communication, and they have understanding with the youth. They know what's best in order to communicate with them, whether that be through pop culture, television shows, or music, or the biggest influence that impacts young advocates is social media. Through this, they rise a lot of social justice topics that can be addressed through the things that young advocates know best. As a young advocate myself, I believe that it is important for me also to help encourage and train up my peers and for them to follow after me. I want to inspire social change and get my peers to understand that as the next generation comes, it starts with us. We are the next generation, and we have to become accountable for each other in order to know how to address sexual assault and domestic violence and to change that together. I believe that it is important for us to stand together, to band together, just to educate one another and to hold up one another as the next generation. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Zion. How fitting to have words of wisdom from you representing our next generation as we think about ending violence and preventing violence. So again, thank you so much. And I will also want to thank all of the other amazing speakers for your words of wisdom, inspiration, hope, and encouragement. And to everyone on the phone, as you continue to work tirelessly to support survivors and their loved ones, please remember to also take care of yourself. We stand together. We are one. I would like to end the call with a poem written by Judy Brown titled Fire. What makes a fire burn is space between the logs, a breathing space. Too much of a good thing, too many logs packed in tight can douse the flames almost as surely as a pail of water would. So building fires require attention to the spaces in between as much as to the wood. When we are able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we can come to see how it is fuel and absence of the fuel together that makes fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. Again, thank you all for joining us today.